The lover of my cheating wife thought he was tough, but he begged me for mercy after confronting him. Hello, Reddit. I don't even know how to start this. Honestly, if you had told me a few months ago that I'd be writing about something like this, I would have laughed in your face. I've always thought of myself as the guy who had it together. You know, the kind of guy who avoided drama, handled his problems quietly, and didn't need to broadcast his life online. But here we are. I guess life has a funny way of humbling you, doesn't it? Right now, I'm still trying to process everything that went down, and to be honest, I feel like I'm drowning. So, I guess I just really need somewhere to unload. I've been married to my wife, Michelle, for 7 years. 7 years of what I thought was a strong, stable partnership. We met in college and fell head over heels for each other. Michelle was different from anyone I'd ever met. Smart, funny, and incredibly beautiful. She had this energy about her, like she could light up any room she walked into. We dated all through college, and by the time we graduated, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. We tied the knot not long after, and for years I thought we had it all. From the outside looking in, our marriage seemed perfect. We seemed to have it all. Our lives were set up in a way that most people would envy. We were financially stable, and I had a very good job that allowed us to live comfortably without worrying about money. I made sure Michelle never felt like she had to carry any financial burden. That was important to me, you know? I wanted her to feel secure, to have the freedom to focus on the things that mattered to her. Michelle had always been upfront about what she wanted. She didn't want a career or the stress that came with it. She wanted to be a stay-at-home wife. It was something she had talked about even before we got married. She wanted the time to focus on herself, her hobbies, and eventually, the family we both planned to have one day. At first, I'll admit, I was hesitant. I grew up in a household where both my parents worked full-time. That was the norm for me, and I guess I just assumed that's how things worked. The idea of a stay-at-home wife felt old-fashioned to me, and I couldn't help but think, why wouldn't she want to work? But Michelle was passionate about it, and over time, her passion softened my resistance. I realized it wasn't my place to judge her dreams. If that's what she wanted, who was I to stand in her way? So, I agreed. I worked my ass off to ensure she could live the life she wanted just so she could be happy. And for a while, it seemed like we were both happy. She got to stay at home, pursue her hobbies, hang out with friends, and live the kind of life she had always wanted. And I got to come home to a wife who seemed happy and content. At least that's what I thought. Michelle started acting distant about a year ago, and at first I didn't think much of it. People go through phases, right? But looking back, the signs were there, clear as day. I just didn't want to see them. She wasn't her usual bubbly, talkative self anymore. Little things started to change, like how she'd spend hours glued to her phone. And when I say hours, I mean hours. It was like her phone became an extension of her hand. If it wasn't already in her grip, the second a notification pinged, she'd practically leap across the room to grab it. I'm talking mid-dinner, mid-conversation, mid-anything. It was weird. At first I brushed it off. Maybe she'd joined a new group chat or was catching up with family. She had always been a social person, and I figured it was just her being, well, her. But then it started to feel different. She wasn't just using her phone more. She was hiding it. She'd angle the screen away when I walked into the room, or quickly lock it if I glanced over. One day, out of pure curiosity, I reached for her phone while it was sitting on the counter, completely innocent, mind you. She practically lunged at me saying, "That's private," and yanked it away. I mean, we'd always had this unspoken trust where neither of us cared about stuff like passwords or devices. Suddenly, she was setting new ones and acting like her phone was Fort Knox. Then there were the nights out with her girlfriends. She started going out more frequently, at least 3 or 4 a week. Again, I didn't question it. Everyone needs time with their friends, and Michelle had always loved her girls' nights. But the thing was, she'd say she'd be home by 10 or 11, and suddenly it'd be 2 or 3 a.m. When she finally did stroll in, she'd mutter something about being stuck in traffic or deciding to grab just one more drink with her friends. Now, I'm not an idiot. Traffic? At midnight? And every single time? I mean, come on. But I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Michelle, the woman I married, the person I trusted more than anyone. Why would I doubt her? But as weeks turned into months, the excuses kept piling up. Traffic, drinks. Oh, her friend's car broke down, so she stayed to help. There was always something. And yeah, I started noticing other changes too. She wasn't as affectionate anymore. No more spontaneous hugs when I got home. No more goofy moments like we used to have. Even her laugh felt hollow, like she was forcing it. Deep down, my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. You know that feeling when you just know something's off? But I didn't want to believe it. This was my wife, my partner, the person I'd built a life with. I told myself I was being ridiculous, overthinking, and letting my imagination get the better of me. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling. So I did what any suspicious husband would do. I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also couldn't sit back and ignore what was happening right in front of me. This went on for a while, and honestly, it was driving me up the wall. Michelle just kept growing more distant, and I had no idea what the hell to do about it. It's not like there's a manual for dealing with your spouse suddenly acting like you're a stranger. I also kept having this gnawing feeling in my gut that something was really wrong, but I didn't know how to approach it. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who's overly paranoid, accusing his wife of stuff just because she's acting a little different. But damn, it was hard to ignore. So I did what anyone in my position might do. I went into full-on fix-it mode. I started trying everything I could think of to bring us back to where we used to be. I figured maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I was missing something. So I pulled out all the stops. Date nights? Oh, you bet. I started planning them like my life depended on it, because in a way, it kind of felt like it did. I wanted to remind her of the good times, to spark whatever had gone out between us. Fancy dinners, weekend getaways, surprise gifts. You name it, I tried it. At first, she seemed into it, or at least she played along. She'd smile and say thank you, and for a moment I'd think, okay, maybe this is working. But then, as soon as we'd get home or the night was over, it was like she'd flip a switch. She'd go back to being distant, quiet, glued to her phone, or too tired to talk. I tried to be more affectionate too. I'd hold her hand more, tell her I loved her out of the blue, leave little notes for her around the house. You know, the cute stuff that usually makes someone feel appreciated. But instead of lighting her up like it used to, she'd just nod or mumble something like, thanks, before going back to whatever she was doing. It was so frustrating because I felt like I was throwing everything I had at saving our relationship, and it was just nothing. She wasn't meeting me halfway. Hell, she wasn't even meeting me a quarter of the way. It was like she'd completely checked out, like I wasn't even there anymore. The worst part? I started blaming myself. I kept thinking, what am I doing wrong? Am I not good enough? Did I say or do something to push her away? I was walking on eggshells, overthinking every little thing I did or said. It was exhausting, man. And the more I tried, the more it felt like I was just pushing her further away. It was like she was building this wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried to tear it down, she just kept adding more bricks. I didn't know how to reach her anymore, and that feeling, that helpless, sinking feeling, it was eating me alive. At this point, I was doing everything I could think of, and none of it seemed to make a damn bit of difference. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop trying. I kept telling myself, this is Michelle, this is my wife, this is worth fighting for. One night, Michelle got a call and rushed into the other room. When she came back, she looked all flustered and said she had an emergency. Apparently, some friend of hers, someone I had never heard of, was in the middle of a huge argument with her boyfriend, and she had supposedly said she wanted her there. She wanted Michelle there for her safety. I'll be honest, at first I was concerned, like really concerned. What if this guy was some violent lunatic? What if Michelle was walking into a dangerous situation? It was 10 p.m. on a Friday, pitch dark outside, and she's telling me she's about to rush out to handle some issues with a friend I didn't even know existed. I asked her if she wanted me to come along. I figured, maybe I could just hang back in the car in case things went sideways. But she quickly brushed me off. She said it was fine and that she would handle it. She seemed so adamant that I stay home, which didn't sit right with me. At all. Now, I've already mentioned how I'd been having this gnawing feeling in my gut for months. That little voice in the back of my head wouldn't shut up, and honestly, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told myself, screw it, if she doesn't want me there, I'm just going to follow her. So I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and drove a safe distance behind her. She didn't seem to notice, which only made me feel more like something was off. I mean, if this was really an emergency, why wasn't she looking more stressed? Why wasn't she hurrying? And then she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel on the other side of town. When I tell you my heart sank, I'm not even exaggerating. Watching her casually park her car, get out, and walk into that hotel like it was no big deal, it was like getting punched in the stomach. My hands were shaking, my mind was racing, and I didn't know what to do. I sat there in my car for what felt like forever, just staring at the hotel entrance. Should I storm in there and confront her? Should I wait outside and catch her on her way out? Should I go full-blown private investigator mode? My mind was going a mile a minute, and I couldn't focus on a single thought long enough to make a decision. Eventually, I decided to leave. Not because I didn't care or because I wasn't furious, but because I needed time to process what I had just seen. What the hell was I supposed to do with this information? How was I supposed to confront her without losing it? She came home the next morning at around 5 a.m., acting like nothing had happened. She strolled in, threw her bag down, and casually climbed into bed like she hadn't just spent the night with a man. I asked her about the so-called friend and the emergency, playing dumb like I didn't already know, and she actually talked about it. She went on about how her friend was fine now, and how the argument wasn't as bad as she initially thought. She even told me that she would have been home earlier, but her friend had asked her to stay a little longer, and of course there was so much traffic on her way back. Hearing her spin this whole elaborate lie right to my face, that's when it really hit me. This is it. This is what's been happening all along. All the late nights, the secrecy, the distance. This was what it had been leading up to. I didn't call her out right then and there. I wanted to, but I held back. I needed proof. And more than anything, I needed to figure out how I was going to handle this without completely losing it. Over the next few days, I gathered evidence. First, I decided to go through our phone bill. Now, I don't know if you've ever done that, but let me tell you, it's like opening Pandora's box. Every call, every text, every timestamp, all laid out in black and white. And sure enough, there it was, a number I didn't recognize. It showed up over and over, mostly late at night. I'm talking about calls that lasted an hour, sometimes more. And they weren't occasional either, they were consistent. It wasn't just the timing of the calls, it was the frequency. This wasn't some random friend or a one-time fling. This was a regular thing, and I couldn't even bring myself to call the number right away. What if he picked up? What the hell was I supposed to say? Still, I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed more than just phone records, so, yeah, I'll admit it, I went full paranoid detective and installed a GPS tracker on her car. Trust me, I hated myself for even considering it. The idea of crossing that line felt wrong on so many levels. But at the same time, how else was I supposed to know the truth? She wasn't going to tell me, that was for damn sure. The installation was easy enough. I slipped it under her car while she was busy upstairs, probably texting him. My hands were shaking the whole time, and I kept telling myself, this isn't who you are. You're not this guy. But the thing is, she made me this guy. I didn't ask for this. I didn't wake up one morning thinking, hey, let's play spy on my wife today. Once the tracker was set up, I started checking the locations it pinged. At first, it was nothing unusual. The grocery store, a coffee shop, her favorite boutique, normal places she would go. But then, a pattern started to emerge. Every few days, her car would end up parked at the same hotel where I had seen her that night. Eventually, I found out who the other guy was. His name was Jake, this younger, cocky personal trainer at Michelle's gym. A total cliche, right? It felt like a bad soap opera, but this was my life. Once I had his name and a face to match, I decided there was no way I was just going to sit back and stew in my anger. I needed to confront him, face to face. I wanted to see the kind of man who was willing to destroy someone else's marriage. I needed to look him in the eye and see what he was made of. So, one evening, I showed up at the gym where he worked. I had done my homework. I knew what his schedule looked like. When I walked in, there he was, right on cue, chatting up some woman who looked like she was half his age. I walked right up to him and tapped him on the shoulder. The look on his face when he turned around was so weird. He looked me up and down, probably trying to size me up, but I didn't give him much time. I told him we needed to talk. Of course, he asked who I was, like he didn't already know. The second I said I was Michelle's husband, his whole demeanor shifted. For a split second, the color drained from his face, and he looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. But then, like clockwork, the bravado kicked back in. We stepped outside, and he started puffing out his chest like he was some tough guy. He tried to act all nonchalant, saying it wasn't his fault that my wife was unhappy. The audacity of that statement. This guy was standing there, trying to justify everything, as if I was supposed to pat him on the back and thank him for pointing out my marital problems. That was the moment I snapped. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him hard against the wall. The look in his eyes shifted instantly. The confidence evaporated, and when I landed a solid punch to his jaw, his tough guy act completely crumbled. He started stammering, telling me to calm down, saying it wasn't that serious. He was practically shaking at this point, apologizing and pleading with me to stop. It was honestly pathetic. For someone who clearly thought he was hot stuff, it didn't take much for him to fold. One shove and one punch, and he was already blubbering like a kid caught stealing candy. He was just a coward who had gotten in way over his head. I told him to forward me everything, every screenshot, every conversation he had with Michelle. At first he tried to say he didn't have anything, but of course I knew that was a lie. I threatened him a bit, and he quickly caved. He pulled out his phone, added me, and started forwarding me their messages. Their conversations were disgusting. Long strings of flirty texts, her sending him pics, plans to meet up, her bad-mouthing me while he lapped it all up. It was a lot to stomach. I couldn't even bring myself to read it all right then. Jake kept apologizing the whole time, saying he didn't mean for things to go this far, that he didn't want any trouble. It was honestly pitiful. I let him go, watching as he stumbled away, probably more embarrassed than anything else. That was when I finally decided to confront Michelle. The second I got home, I didn't waste any time. I laid it all out. Everything. She tried to deny it, of course, scrambling to come up with some excuse like I hadn't already put all the pieces together. But when I told her I had confronted Jake, that I had evidence, screenshots of their messages, and everything he had forwarded to me, she broke down right there. She admitted everything, the affair, the late nights, the constant lying. It was all true. She begged me to forgive her, to let us work through it somehow. But come on, how was I supposed to do that? Forgive her? Pretend like nothing happened? There was no way in hell I could do that. Cheating is one of those things you can't just walk back from. It's a line you cross, and once you do, there's no undoing it. I told her to leave. That day I packed up her things, told her to get out, and made it clear I would be filing for divorce. She cried, pleaded, made every excuse in the book, but I wasn't budging. I had made up my mind. It's been a few weeks since that day. I served her the divorce papers not long after, but of course she didn't take it well. She keeps bouncing between extremes, begging for a second chance and swearing up and down she'll fix things, and then flipping into anger, refusing to sign the papers, threatening me, saying I'll regret it. At one point, she even said she was going to sue me for everything I have. It's insane. And no, I'm not budging on this. Cheating is unforgivable. It's not like an apology magically fixes the betrayal or wipes away everything that's been broken. I don't care how sorry she claims to be. Sorry isn't enough. After she left that day, I finally cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was the first time I had cried since finding out about the affair. Even when I saw her walking into that hotel for the first time, I hadn't cried. Sure, I felt awful, sick to my stomach, heart sinking, but the tears didn't come then. It felt like I had been holding them all back, saving them for that exact moment when everything was said and done, and she was out of the house. It was like all the emotions I'd been bottling up finally burst out, and I let them. Weirdly, it felt good, relieving almost, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. It wasn't that everything was fine, not by a long shot, but at least I wasn't carrying all of it alone anymore. What's crazy is how unpredictable she's been since then. One moment she's texting me, saying she's sorry and wants to make things right, and the next she's threatening me, saying I'll regret divorcing her and that I'll miss her. It's exhausting. Honestly, I'm just counting down the days until this divorce is finalized, so I can finally move on and be rid of her completely. What's been both strange and kind of freeing is talking about all this. Everyone knows now. Her family, our friends, my family. They all know the broad strokes of what happened. I told them she cheated, and that was that. But I never really went into detail with anyone. I didn't explain how everything unfolded, how awful things were leading up to finding out, or how I felt through all of it. Finally getting this out, just saying it all, feels good in a weird way. Like I'm unpacking all the chaos piece by piece and leaving it behind me. It's been a nightmare, sure, but maybe now I can start figuring out what comes next. Update. Hello, Reddit. Where do I even start? First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you. The amount of support I received was absolutely overwhelming. I honestly didn't expect my original post to blow up the way it did. Like I said before, I made the post just to rant, to get it all out of my system. It felt like I was screaming into the void. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but wow, the response was incredible. The comments, the DMs, the stories people shared, it's been amazing. I cannot thank you all enough for taking the time to write such kind, thoughtful, and supportive responses. Even the people who shared their own experiences really helped me feel like I wasn't alone. Realizing that so many others have been through something similar gave me a sense of solidarity and strength I didn't even know I needed. So seriously, thank you. I know this update is a long time coming, but I wanted to wait until everything was finalized. And now I can officially say the divorce is done. It's finalized. It took longer than I hoped because she tried to drag it out for as long as she possibly could, but we finally got there. It took months, but it's over. And let me tell you, she's a mess. She fought tooth and nail to make the process difficult, but here's the kicker. The laws in my state are very strict about infidelity. Since I filed for divorce on the grounds of cheating, she was automatically disqualified from getting anything. Nothing, not a cent. She didn't like that one bit. She's been absolutely losing it over this, messaging me from different random numbers after I've blocked her actual one. It's honestly kind of ridiculous. She keeps sending these long, rambling messages, accusing me of all sorts of things, claiming she's going to sue me for her properties. Like, what properties? She doesn't have any. It's honestly kind of funny now. She's all talk, and at this point, if she wants to try suing me, she can go ahead. Bring it on. I really don't care anymore. But enough about her. Let's talk about me. I've been doing so much better, and it feels amazing to finally say that. My family has been incredibly supportive through all of this, and my friends have really shown up for me. It feels like this massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I'm happier, I'm more social, and I'm actually enjoying my life again. I've even been saving way more money, which is something I didn't expect to be a big deal, but wow, does it make a difference? For a while, I worried I'd feel miserable, you know? I loved her once, so I thought being without her would be unbearable. But the moment I found out she had been cheating, the moment I confronted her and kicked her out, it was like a switch flipped. The feelings just disappeared. It's wild to think about now, but honestly, I'm grateful for it. I've even been in therapy. I've only gone a couple of times so far, but honestly, those sessions have been pretty helpful. It's such a relief to have someone to talk to, you know, someone who's completely neutral, just there to listen and offer a fresh perspective. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect or if it would even help, but it's been surprisingly good. I've realized there's so much I've been holding on to that I didn't even know I was carrying. Who knew unloading on a stranger could feel so freeing? My life has been good. Better than good, really. I feel free in a way I didn't even know I needed to. It's been a process, sure, but I'm in such a better place now. This update is for everyone who wanted to know what happened. I guess I can officially say I have a crazy ex-wife now, but I'm not letting her get to me. She's not my problem anymore, and that's a huge relief. So thank you all again for your support. It meant the world to me.